हेलो फ्रेंड्स, होप यू आर डूइंग वेल। सो आज के वीडियो में हम सुप्रीम कोर्ट की एक बहुत ही रिसेंट और इम्पोर्टेंट रूलिंग के बारे में देखेंगे। ये रूलिंग की पर्सनली मैं बहुत टाइम से वेट कर रही थी। ये रूलिंग है विथ रिगार्ड्स टू डिडक्शन ऑफ एम्प्लॉयज कंट्रीब्यूशन टू प्रोविडेंट फंड एंड अदर रेकग्नाइज्ड फंड। सो लेट्स गेट इनटू इट। लीड केस है चेकमेट सर्विसेज प्राइवेट लिमिटेड वर्सेस कमीशन ऑफ इनकम टैक्स, और ये सारी एसएलपी को इस जजमेंट के जरिए डिस्पोज किया है। So let's see. Leave granted. Berger Paints India Limited versus CIT Kolkata was the lead matter while hearing the batch of this appeals. However, the parties agreed to treat Checkmate Services Private Limited versus CIT1 as the lead appeal for convenience. Now we'll see. In all these appeals, the common question involved is with respect to interpretation of Section 36(1), Clause 5A and Section 43B of the Income Tax Act, and whether the appellant assessees are entitled to reduction of the amounts deposited by towards contribution in terms of the Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, the Employees Provident Fund Scheme, the Employees State Insurance Scheme ESI, and the Employees State Insurance Regulations, or any other provident or superannuation fund. In the years under consideration, the AO had ruled that the appellant had belatedly deposited their employees' contribution to EF and ESI, considering the due dates under the relevant tax and regulations. Consequently, the AO ruled that by virtue of the Section 36, read with the 224X, such sums received by the appellants constitute an income. These amounts could not have been allowed as deduction when payment was made beyond the relevant due date under the respective acts. In other words, as per AO, as such sums were paid beyond the due dates as prescribed under the respective acts, the right to claim such sums allowable as deduction while computing the income was lost forever. The assessee's players were unsuccessful before the ITAT. Ultimately, in the case of the impugned judgment, the Gujarat High Court too rejected its plea. Noticing a division of the opinion on this issue, the High Courts of the Bombay, Himachal Pradesh, Kolkata, Guwahati, and Delhi favoring the interpretation of the beneficial to the assessees on the one hand, and High Courts of the Kerala and Gujarat preferring the interpretation in favor of the revenue on the other hand. This court granted special leave to appeal in all these cases. तो इस केस का बैकग्राउंड बताऊँ, बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग है कि जैसे कि आपको पता होगा सेक्शन 43B है इनकम टैक्स में, बिजनेस इनकम के हेड में कुछ डिडक्शन लिस्ट आउट किए हैं सेक्शन 43B में, और सेक्शन 43B नॉन ऑब्स्टेंट क्लोज है। तो सेक्शन 43B में जो डिडक्शन लिस्ट आउट किए हैं वो एसएससी को तभी मिलेंगे जब उसने उसका एक्चुअल पेमेंट बिफोर द फाइलिंग ऑफ ड्यू डेट किया है, इरिस्पेक्टिव ऑफ ट्रीटमेंट इन बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स। अगर उसने रिटर्न फाइल करने से पहले वो पेमेंट नहीं किया है, 43B में जो लिस्ट दी गई है, टैक्सेस हो गए, इंटरेस्ट ऑन लोन हो गया, या फिर ऐसे एम्प्लॉय कंट्रीब्यूशन टू PF ESI हो गया, वो उसने एक्चुअल कंट्रीब्यूशन बिफोर द फाइलिंग ऑफ ड्यू डेट विच इज़ जुलाई और अक्टूबर, तो उसको डिडक्शन नहीं मिलेगा। और अगर उसने पे कर दिया है तो बुक्स में उसने कुछ भी ट्रीटमेंट दी हो, उसको डिडक्शन अलाउ होगा। अब बारी आती है PF और ESI की। तो जैसे कि आपको पता है PF और ESI की ड्यू डेट है 15th ऑफ द नेक्स्ट मंथ। अगर इस मंथ का PF और ESI ये अक्टूबर चल रहा है तो अक्टूबर का कंट्रीब्यूशन 15 नवंबर से पहले एम्प्लॉयर को एम्प्लॉयज़ का कंट्रीब्यूशन और खुद का अपना एम्प्लॉयर का कंट्रीब्यूशन पे करना है विद इन द 15th ऑफ नवंबर। पहले उसमें 5 दिन का ग्रेस पीरियड देते थे, अब वो नहीं है। सो बेसिकली ये केस इसमें ऐसा है कि एम्प्लॉय ने 15 के बाद कंट्रीब्यूशन दिया है, मतलब लेट दिया है, ऑफ कोर्स विथ इंटरेस्ट और वो सब, बट उसने रिटर्न फाइल करने से पहले पे कर दिया है, तो एम्प्लॉयर को खुद का कंट्रीब्यूशन 43B में अलाउ होगा, बट एम्प्लॉय का कंट्रीब्यूशन डिसअलाउ होता था ये सारी अपील्स में, क्योंकि कोर्ट सभी ये जो जो हाई कोर्ट्स का मेंशन किया है, गुजरात स्पेशली गुजरात हाई कोर्ट, तो हाई कोर्ट ने ऐसा बोला था कि ये एम्प्लॉय का पैसा है, वो एम्प्लॉयर की इनकम हो गई, चाहे उसने रिटर्न फाइल करने से पहले भर दिया है, बट अंडर द रिस्पेक्टिव एक्ट यानी अंडर द पीएफ एंड ईएसआई एक्ट उसने लेट पेमेंट किया है, तो उसको ये रिडक्शन नहीं मिल सकता है। तो ये सारी अपील्स सुप्रीम कोर्ट में पेंडिंग थी, तो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये अभी डिस्पोज कर दी है। तो यहाँ सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने रिलेवेंट सेक्शन किया है कि 224 में इनकम को इंक्लूड किया है, जैसे कि any sum received by the assessee from his employees as contribution to PF or ESI, right? Then section 36 है, 36 का मेंशन किया है जिसमें एम्प्लॉयर्स और एम्प्लॉय का कंट्रीब्यूशन डिडक्शन अवेलेबल है ऑन और बिफोर द ड्यू डेट, ऐसा यहाँ लिखा है। देन 43B आता है, नॉटविथस्टैंडिंग एनीथिंग नॉन ऑब्स्टेंट क्लोज। अब इंटरेस्टिंगली 43B में एम्प्लॉयर का खुद का कंट्रीब्यूशन का मेंशन है, बट एम्प्लॉय का कंट्रीब्यूशन का मेंशन नहीं है, बट डिफरेंट कोर्ट यूज टू टेक लिबरल अप्रोच, और डिफरेंट जिस कोर्ट ने अभी तक अलाउ किया है उनका कहना यही था कि उसने भले ही 15 के बाद किया है, बट ड्यू डेट से रिटर्न इनकम टैक्स की ड्यू डेट की रिटर्न फाइलिंग की ड्यू डेट से पहले तो कर ही दिया है ना, तो टेकिंग दैट लिबरल अप्रोच दे यूज टू अलाउ इट, एक्सेप्ट गुजरात एंड केरला हाई कोर्ट, उन्होंने डिसअलाउ कर दिया था। तो यहाँ सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये सारे प्रोविजंस को मेंशन किया है। अभी देखते हैं अपीलेंट का कंटेंशन क्या था बिफोर द सुप्रीम कोर्ट। So now let's see what Supreme Court said. The factual narration reveals two diametrically opposed views in regard to interpretation of Section 36 on one hand and proviso to Section 43B on other. If one goes by the legislative history of this provision, what is discriminable is Parliament's endeavour in introducing Section 43B, which opens with its non-obstant clause, was to primarily ensure that deduction otherwise permissible and thereto claimed on mercantile basis were expressly conditioned in certain cases upon actual payment. In other words, a mere claim of expenditure in the books was insufficient to entitle the reduction. The assessee had to, before the prescribed date, actually pay the amounts, be it towards the tax liability, interest, or other similar liability spelled out by the provision. As I said, बुक्स में जो इफेक्ट दी है वो इरेलीवेंट है, 43B में जो लिस्ट दिया है उसके लिए एक्चुअल पेमेंट नेसेसरी है। Section 43B falls in Part 5 of the IT Act. What is apparent is that the scheme of the Act is such that Section 28 to 38 deal with the different kinds of reduction, whereas 40 to 43B spells out special provisions laying out the mechanism for assessments and expressly prescribing conditions for the disallowances. In terms of the scheme, Section 40, which to start with non-obstance clause overriding 30 to 38, deals with what can be deducted in computing income under the head PGBP. Likewise, 48.2 opens with a non-obstant clause and spell out the expenses payment non-deductible in certain circumstances. 41 elaborates conditions which applied with respect to certain deductions which are otherwise allowed in respect of loss, expenditure, trading liability. If we consider this scheme, 40 to 43B are concerned with and enacted different conditions that tax adjudicator has to enforce, the assessee has to comply with to secure a valid deduction. The scheme of the provision relating to deduction to 30 to 37 on the other hand deal primarily with the business, commercial or profession expenditure under various heads including depreciation. Each of these deduction has its own contours depending upon the expressions used and the conditions that are to be met. It is therefore necessary to bear in mind that the specific enumeration of deductions dependent upon fulfillment of the particular conditions would qualify as allowable deductions. Failure by assessee to comply with these conditions would rather render the claim vulnerable to rejection. In this scheme, the reduction made by the employers to approval of the provident fund schemes is the subject matter of Section 36 Clause 4. It is noteworthy that this provision was part of the original IT Act. It has largely remained unaltered. On the other hand, Section 36(1) 5A was specifically inserted by the Finance Act 1987 with effect from 1/4/1988. Through the same amendment, Section 3B 224, which defines various kinds of the income, inserted clause X. This is significant amendment because Parliament intended that the amounts not earned by the assessee but received by it, whether in form of deductions or otherwise as receipts, were to be treated as income. The inclusion of the class of receipt, that is amount received or deducted from the employees, were to be part of the employees' income. Since these amounts were not receipts that belong to the assessee but were held by it as a trustees, it were Section 36(1) 5A was inserted specifically to ensure that if these receipts were deposited in PFESI of the employees concerned, they could be treated as deduction. 36(1) was 5A was hedged with the condition that the amounts receipts had to be deposited by the employer with PFESI on or before the due date. The last expression, due date, was dealt with the explanation as date by which such amounts had to be credited by the employer in concern with annexments such as PFESI. Importantly, such condition, that is depositing on amount on or before due date, has not been enacted in relation to employer's contribution. The significance of this is that Parliament treated contribution under Section 36(1) 5A differently from those under 36(1) 4. The latter, that is employer's contribution, is described as the sum paid by the assessee as an employer by way of contribution towards recognized PF. However, phraseology of Section 36(1) 5A differs from 36(1) 4. It enacts that any sum received by assessee from any of these employees as a by way of contribution towards the recognized PF, if such sum is credited, it is to be treated as income under Section subclause X of the clause 24. If some sum is credited by the assessee to employee's account in the relevant fund or funds on or before the due date, the essential character of the employee's contribution, that is part of the employee's income held in trust by the employer, is underlined by the condition that it has to be deposited on or before due date. It is therefore manifest that the definition of the contribution in Section 2C is used in entirely different senses in the relevant deductions clauses. The differentiation is also evident from the fact that each of these contributions is separately dealt with in different clauses. All this established that the Parliament, while introducing Section 36(1) 5A along with the 224X, was aware of the distinction between the two types of contribution. There was a statutory classification and RTX between the two. यहाँ सुप्रीम कोर्ट ये कहना चाहती है कि एम्प्लॉयर का कंट्रीब्यूशन और एम्प्लॉय का कंट्रीब्यूशन दोनों अलग चीज़ है. एम्प्लॉय का जो कंट्रीब्यूशन है वो ट्रस्टीशिप में एम्प्लॉय की इनकम में से डिडक्ट करके ट्रस्टीशिप में वो हेल्ड कर रहा है, जो बाद में ड्यू डेट से पहले उसको डिपॉजिट करना है, तो वो सेक्शन 224X में उसका इनकम गिनी जाएगी एम्प्लॉयर की, अगर उसने डिपॉजिट नहीं किया है बिफोर द ड्यू डेट. सो टू आर डिफरेंट, टोटली डिफरेंट distinct provisions to be read separately. When Parliament introduced Section 43B, what was on the statute book was only employer's contribution. At that point in time, there was no question of employee's contribution being considered as a part of the employee's earning. On the application of the original principles of this law, it could have been treated only as a receipts not amounting to income. When Parliament introduced amendments in 88-89 inserting 36(1) 5A and simultaneously inserting second proviso 243B, its intention was not to treat the disparate nature of the amount similarly. As discussed previously, the memorandum introducing finance bill clearly stated that the provision, especially second proviso 243B, was introduced to ensure timely payments were made by the employer to the concerned fund and avoid mischief of the employers retaining amounts for long periods. That Parliament intended to retain the separate character of these two amounts is evident from the use of different languages. 224X 2 links amount received from the employees, whether amount is received from the employer by way of deduction authorized by the statute. As income, it is the character of the amount that is important and not the income amount. This amount retained by the employer from out of the employee's income by way of deduction were treated as an income in hands of the employer. The significance of this provision is that on the one hand, it brought into the field of income amounts that were receipts or deduction from the employee's income at the time payment within the prescribed time by way of contribution to employee's share to the credit with the relevant fund is to be treated as deduction. The other important feature is that distinction between employee's contribution and employee's contribution required to be deposited by the employer was maintained and continues to be maintained. On the other hand, Section 43B covers all deductions that are permissible as expenditure or outgoing forming parts of the assessee's liabilities. These include liabilities such as tax liabilities, sales duties, or interest liability having regard to the terms of contract. Thus, timely payment of this alone entitle the assessee to the benefit of the reduction from the total income. The essential objective of 43B is to ensure that if the assessee are following the mercantile method of accounting, nevertheless, the reduction of such liabilities based only on the book entries would not be given. To pass muster, actual payments were necessary precondition for allowing such deduction. Now this is very important para where Supreme Court give distinction between the two directions. The distinction between employee's contribution, which is primary liability under law in terms of section 3614 and its liability to deposit amount received by it by deducted by 3615A is thus crucial. The former parts of the employer's income and the later retains character as an income by virtue of 224X unless the conditions spelled by the explanation to section 361 5A are satisfied, that is, depositing such amount received or deducted from the employee on or before the due date. In other words, there is a marked distinction between the nature and character of the two amounts. That is, employer's liability is to be paid out of the income, whereas the second is deemed income by definition, since it is a deduction from the employee's income and held in trust by the employer. See here, italic is given, words are in italic to emphasize that is the money contribution received from the employees are income deemed income in trust by it is held by the employer as in trust. This marked distinction has to be borne while interpreting the obligation of every assessee under section 43B. Lastly, court renders its judgment by saying that in the opinion of this court, the reasoning and the impugned judgment that the non-obstant clause would not in any manner dilute or override the employer's obligation to deposit the amount returned by it or by deducted from the employee's income unless the condition that is deposited on or before the due date is correct and justified. The non-obstant clause has to be understood in the context of the entire provision of the 43B, which is to ensure timely payment before the returns are filed and certain liabilities which are to be borne by the assessee in form of tax, interest payment and other statutory liability. I'm reading once again because this is very important. The non-obstant clause has to be understood in context of the entire provision of 43B, which is to ensure timely payment before the returns are filed or certain liabilities which are to be borne by the assessee in form of tax, interest payment and other statutory liability. In case of these liabilities, what constitute the due date is defined by the statute. Nevertheless, under assessees are given some levy in that as long as the deposits are made beyond the due date but before the date of filing of return, the deduction is allowed. That, however, cannot apply in case of the amounts which are held in trust, as in case of the employee's contribution which are deducted from their income. They are not part of the assessee's employer's income, nor are they head of deduction per se in form of statutory payout. They are others' income. Money is only deemed to be the income with the object of ensuring that they are paid within the due date specified in the particular law. यानी एम्प्लॉय से जो कंट्रीब्यूशन मिला है वो एम्प्लॉय की इनकम है, एम्प्लॉयर की खुद की इनकम नहीं है, वो मनी हेल्ड इन ट्रस्ट है, तो उसको पेमेंट उसकी जो डिडक्शन है वो तभी पे की जाएगी जब उसने ड्यू डेट से पहले डिपॉजिट की है. इट इज अपॉन डिपॉजिट इन टर्म्स ऑफ दोज एनेक्टमेंट्स ऑन और बिफोर द ड्यू डेट्स मेंशन मैंडेटेड बाय सच कंसर्न लॉ. यानी पीएफ ईएसआई में जो ड्यू डेट है 15 उससे पहले अगर उसने डिपॉजिट किया है तो ही उसको मिलेगा, अदरवाइज नॉट. Thus, it is an essential condition for the deduction that such amounts are deposited on or before the due date. If such interpretation were to be adopted, the non-obstant clause under Section 43B or anything contained in that provision would not absolve the assessee from its liability to deposit employees' contribution on or before the due date as a condition for reduction. In light of the above reasoning, this court is of opinion that there is no infirmity in the approach of the impugned judgment. The decision of the other high courts holding to contrary do not lay down the correct law. For other reasons, this court does not find any reason to interfere with the impugned judgment. The appeals are accordingly dismissed. सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने एसएससी की अपील को डिसमिस कर दिया और उसके साथ ही ये जो सारी एसएलपी थी जिसमें एसएससी ने एसएलपी फाइल की थी उस सबको भी डिसमिस कर दिया. So it is very important judgment, especially for the गुजरात jurisdiction, जहाँ बहुत सारे जो गुजरात का ये डिसीजन है चेकमेट और जीएसआरटीसी का, उसके बाद बहुत सारी केस में रीओपनिंग के केस में पीएफ और ईएसआई का मुद्दा आया था और रीओपनिंग हुआ है, तब उस सारे केस में अभी नेचुरली डिसअलाउ होगा और टैक्स कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस आएंगे. इंटरेस्ट और ऑफ कोर्स इंटरेस्ट के साथ सबको पे करना होगा. So it would be very much burden on the assessee now. So I hope आपको ये वीडियो पसंद आई होगी. Keep watching. Have a good day. Bye.